I'd like to talk about the land bill R&R, one of the most hot topics discussed right now. A lot of debate going on, a lot of standing committee recommendations, a lot of things being debated on the same. So I would basically like to take you through what exactly is a land bill, just through a small threadbare analysis and some recommendations, which is what we as a consultancy recommend. Just to give you a small background of myself, so I'm representing the company called JLL. We are in the field of real estate consultancy, and this is based on our experience working with different companies, corporates, government, who all work in the field of land acquisition at different stages. So just to take you through the bill, first a snapshot at the real estate scenario. This is one thing which I think has been covered by different speakers in the last session. So how the real estate sector has been changing from what it was, what it is now, and what it is going to be. So from a very fragmented, from a very disorganized and a very local industry to presently where it is, more corporates are stepping in. There are a lot of these big business houses, business groups which are stepping in like Tata's, Godrej, Adanis of the world. And heading forward, there is more consolidation, there is more, organized play which is expected down the line. The amount of GDP being contributed by real estate is expected to grow in a very significant manner if the policies obviously support. So this I think any bill which comes in which impacts real estate has to take this particular thing into consideration, that real estate is the second biggest employer and it is getting organized. It is not what it was, and hence all the policies should be aligned to that fact. Need of the hour, development in the regulatory time frame. As of now, the public concerns are outweighing the outdated law. There are old laws of land acquisition which certainly needs repealment. So there are a lot of provisions which needs to be considered, which needs to be added. But at the same time, the land bill, the face of it, the way it has come, it has certain considerations which I would definitely like to point out. Going further, scope of the draft bill. Government acquires lands for its own use. Private companies immediately declared use via private companies. Now, a fundamental difference on a Land Acquisition Act, which used to be 1890 to now in 2011, which has come, is the land acquisition, the purpose for which the land was to be acquired was very, very broad in the old bill, and in the new bill they are making it very, very specific that these are the only purposes for which the land could be acquired, and this much percentage of the agricultural land could be acquired, a cultivable land. So this is a positive element, I would say, wherein it more specifically defines what is a public purpose. Otherwise, it was quite a discretion initially in the previous part of a bill, wherein anything and everything could be categorized under the public purpose, obviously subject to certain terms and conditions. But this is a good element. Only R&R provisions will apply in case a private company buys land for a project more than 100 acres in rural areas or more than 50 acres in urban areas. On top of that, if any private company is acquiring a land and a part of an acquisition, a part of a land which falls in the government or a public use has to be acquired by the government, then entire R&R regulations, stipulations shall prevail. Now, these are the two concern areas which I have pointed out separately, because any private company which is acquiring land on its own buying at a market price is basically doing a transaction with the willing buyers at the market price. And typically market price, or whatever the price they sell at, will typically account for whatever the rehabilitation they have in mind. They want to buy an alternate land or whatever is whatever is a scope, alternate scope they are looking at. So in such circumstances, applying R&R rehabilitation rules to private companies who are doing private projects, acquiring land on their own, I think is totally not justified, even if whatever is the area. So even if I'm going for acquiring a bigger township land and acquiring the land from the market at market prices, then these regulations definitely don't have any reasons to apply for those private developers. On top of that, just to give you a small example, so one of our private deals, a deal by an industry which we were doing in one of our hill states. So there was this 50-acre land which we had acquired, and there was a small revenue road which was passing through it. Now that revenue road gave an access to that particular land itself, but now we had to go back to the government to let us take that road. Now, given the present circumstances, the entire R&R regulations will apply to the entire 50-acre, which definitely will make industry unviable. So these are the concern areas. Public purpose, the purpose is very clearly defined. I think this is a good element, but the good element is, so for example, defense, roadways, highways, sports, land for project affected people, improvement of village urban sites. This is very clearly defined, and this is the public purposes as has been defined. At the same time, some of the areas what they have mentioned, like, you know, if the land is to be acquired, other than the points which are mentioned above, uses for public-private partnership and uses by the private companies. In these two cases, when a public-private partnership or a private company has to acquire, then a consent of close to 70 to 80 odd percent people shall be required. Now, the very fundamental principle of a land acquisition act is an involuntary acquisition. Otherwise, there is no acquisition in the first place. In case it is an involuntary acquisition for a public purpose, when we consider a bigger scenario for entire state, if a power plant is required, then the people who occupy that land definitely will not be giving that consent. Getting the consent of 70 to 80 people is practically not possible. This is a grave concern area which we have even given our recommendation to government at various forums, that a public-private partnership is the need of the hour if the infrastructure has to grow. For public-private partnership, if 70% consent is required for the people who own the land underlying asset on which the infrastructure has to come, shall not be possible. And if the private companies are doing 80% consent, that is really a lot of percentage of people giving consent to a particular project, which looks practically very difficult. Besides that, there is a very elaborate process which looks quite comprehensive. The way the land, if it has to be acquired, then first and foremost, there is an authority which shall be formed. Then there will be a social impact analysis, social cost benefit analysis shall be done for the entire area, which would basically include everybody or all stakeholders as we call. So all the people who own the land over there, all the farmers, all the tillers, all the people who don't own the land but are deriving employment out of that. If there is a natural resource, a water body which is going, then whosoever the people who are deriving employment out of that, they all need to rehabilitate it. This is a very significant and a good element, I must say, social impact analysis, which needs to be done. But at the same time, a small concern here is, if you see, I have kind of consolidated, but actually there are so many steps. So there has to be representation from panchayats, from NGOs, from government bodies, from experts panel. Everyone has to approve. There are different steps. Social impact analysis has to be published in the papers, in all the public media. Objection shall be invited. Then the actions shall be taken. Then a tribunal authority is being established. I'll just come to that to address all the concern. So what this basically will do is, this will basically elaborate the process. And typically, as you know, in an infrastructure and a real estate project, like Mr. Jan had pointed in the last session, the time is the essence. More time it takes away all the viability of a project, be it infrastructure, be it real estate. More time, more interest, more cost, everything goes for a toss. So the processes, as has been defined, is pretty decent, but the fact is, the timelines needs to be associated with each of these processes, how much it has to take, and there has to be an alternate mechanism wherein, you know, in case it gets at a certain stage, the projects doesn't get stalled, the proceedings can happen parallelly, so that the projects basically become viable. Next, the key features, one of the very key features of the draft bill is the institutions which are being proposed to set up. So there is National Monitoring Committee, which will have an oversight central level for all projects. At the state level, we'll have state land acquisition R&R authority for dispute resolution, which will have adjudicating powers. Chief Secretary Committee determines whether the project are for public purpose. State Commission R&R, overall admin, LA and R&R in state. Now at state level, one of the 2-3 points which are very critical in the land bill which have been mentioned is, every project which has to come, the acquirer or whosoever is acquiring authority has to submit a report as to this is the bare minimum land which is required, and all other alternate possible land options have been considered, and the one which is being considered right now is the most viable, which is a good element, because in that case, you know, a lot of things will get eradicated, like, you know, in that basically goes to establish the viability of a project. And at the same time, one very significant element which has been mentioned, which the state has to monitor, is, like sir was mentioning some time back, that 51% of the land is cultivable and 49% is not usable. So we can only use that 49% of land. Out of the cultivable land, only 5% is allowed at the max, that too with lot of ifs and buts, which is a good element, because, you know, a cultivable land basically is meant for agriculture, and you can't have, or you should not have, any projects, and that let be used for agriculture. The non-cultivable part, which is approximately 49% of the rural hinterland, can be used for such acquisitions. At the project level, then we have district collector, administrator, RR, rehabilitation, resettlement, and RR committee who will oversee everything. Now, one very, very important component of a land bill is a compensation, how it is calculated. The previous land bill of 1800, the land value was to be estimated, the market value as they called, and a solatium of 30% was being awarded. It has been drastically increased. For rural areas, the market value of land has to be estimated. Different ways to calculate that. Standing committee has given different regulations. So market values to be estimated for rural areas, multiplied by 2 straightforward. All the assets which are there on the land, so be it trees, be it the built up structure, be it the crops which are standing over there, to be added, and a solution equal to the entire value which is being calculated. So the entire value which the agriculture farmer may get is close to even 600% of the market value. In the case of urban areas, the 200% of a market value, again market value calculated by different ways as they've recommended, is to be given. Now the concern, a small two concerns which we want to point out for calculating this sort of a compensation is, first and foremost, is when we say the fundamental definition of a market value. Market value is ideally supposed to take everything into account. Otherwise, it is not a market value. And market value, the way the government has given over here is that, the top of the registration values, which has happened in past couple of years and things like that. Now, obviously, we know the registry value to a market value is different. So when the concept of market value is coming in the first place, then we don't need to multiply anything. A fair market value is to be given. And the problem areas are going to be the fringe areas where, the urban and rural boundaries are there. So, just at the boundary, an acre of land is urban and just the adjoining boundary shall be rural. So kind of compensation. So if imagine in a family there is a land, half of it comes in an urban area and half of it comes in a rural. So the bit which comes in a rural, which belongs to say a brother, will get almost 3 times the compensation as a urban guy will be getting. So that is going to be a potential dispute area going further. So this blanketly drawing a boundary that, in urban it is 200 and in urban it is 200, in rural it could go to 600, may create a lot of trouble. So we can have a more scientific manner of calculating the market research. Various agencies are there which do market which calculate market value based on discounted cash flows, on the whatever the value of a land it can be used to, and what is a precedence in the market of a similar land in the vicinity. So if land value being calculated in that way, I think that's much more scientific and will lead to much lesser dispute. Just case in a point, we've done a study for Bangalore Metro. So the areas wherever the pylons, wherever the stations were coming, they had got a research report done wherein the market value was assessed, and no significant opposition has been observed by them, no significant litigations, the process going much smooth. Rehabilitation, resettlement, entitlement. Every resettled area has to be provided with certain infrastructure facilities. These facilities includes road, drainage, provision of drinking water, grazing land, bank, post offices, etc. The bill also provide for displaced families with certain R&R entitlement. These include land for house as per the Indira Awas Yojana in rural areas, a one-time allowance. Then there is a resettlement allowance also, which is allowed again 50,000. Then an option choosing either mandatory employment in projects where the jobs are being created, or a one-time payment of rupees 5 lakh, or an inflation-adjusted annuity of 2,000 per month per family for 20 years. Now, the last point I would just like to point here is, this is a point where industry is taking a lot of objection, because industry typically wants a one-time compensation which they can pay and they get over, be it whatever. Hanging on for a project for 20 years, giving annuity is something really going to get difficult for industries. Because imagine for a real estate project, or an infrastructure project wherein you set up the project in 3 to 5 years time, but you still have to keep paying these annuity charges to them for a long extended period, is going to be a lot of issue. Instead, you all club it in one go, mention what is the charges, or give employment, or give a part of a developed land which is a part of an R&R, but that annuity kind of a concept is really not flying through. Other provision, land acquisition, resettlement, no change of ownership without prior permission. So if a land has been acquired for a particular purpose, no significant change of a purpose for which the land could be utilized has been provided for, which is a positive element, I would say. A land which is unused for 10 years can return back to the land bank of the government, which again is a positive element, which will basically prevent land hoarding and undue speculation. The government may temporarily occupy the use of a waste or arable land for public purposes, and the compensation and the compensation R&R provisions are much too different, which is again a good element given the fact that the wastelands not being cultivated can be used for certain things, and again the R&R provisions are not that stringent. In any district, land acquisition will be restricted to a maximum of 5% of irrigated multiple crop land. So multiple crop land is a land where three crops in a year can be grown, or it has a assured irrigation. This is again a very significant and a good element. And then provision of bill shall apply to land acquisition under 16 existing laws. Just to give a very brief snapshot of comparison of a Land Acquisition Act 1894 to 2011, public purpose sales has been more elaborately defined, and certain things have been taken out. So whatever public purposes were given initially have been included, whereas certain things has been excluded, like I just said, public-private partnership or a private acquisition, and the terms have been increased much to further in terms of consent required from the people. Consent point I've mentioned. Social impact analysis, there was no provision for doing a social impact analysis in the last provision, in the last bill, whereas it has been it has been made a mandatory provision in this particular bill. Compensation based on market value, whereas it has been increased in the present bill. Market value, there are different regulations. The standing committee meeting which happened on 17th May 2012 has given different way of calculating market value. This is a subject which is still being debated upon, so I'll not touch on that in detail. Solatium has been increased from 30 to 100% of whatever the total value which is being calculated. Resale of land, no provision. Prior permission from government required in the present bill, which is a positive element. Sharing of profit, no provision. In the present case, 20% of a developed land. In case a land which is being acquired for a purpose and resold, the 20% of developed part of a land or the shares around that much shall be transferred to the land owning, the original landowners. That's a good element. R&R, no provision for R&R, whereas in the present case, a proper provision for resettlement and rehabilitation is coming into picture. Impact on real estate and pricing volume, the compensation clause to hike up the land cost by 50 to 70%. This is our estimate, and this may even go higher. A lot of developers will be hesitant to take up big projects. You may practically stop thinking of those integrated townships which really have come up, like Magarpata, like Lavasa and things like that. Pressure on affordable housing. Typically, affordable housings do survive when there is a large scale project. There are economies of scales. So, case in point, a lot of developers are doing these economical housing on the fringes of Maharashtra, outside Bombay. So, those projects are really going to suffer a lot, and high consent rate to make acquisitions extremely difficult. Critical analysis, again our own observations, area under assured irrigation, public purpose, social impact analysis, and landless farmers. These are the positive elements which were not very intensively covered in the last bill, whereas points for consideration and to be thought about is infrastructure real estate is really going to take a big hit, consent of as high as 80%, lengthy procedures, lot of formalities, lot of more institutions being created in the middle, fringe areas is going to be a big trouble area, and not a one-time settlement. These are the areas which we see are of a grave concern. Going further, I think transparency in the ease of land acquisition will really define how the landscape of a country comes up and how the infrastructure grows in it.